Hello everybody, my name's Lee Mackenzie. I'm a CELTA tutor, teacher trainer and director of studies, and welcome to my video on lesson planning. This video is going to concentrate on lesson aims, stage aims, stages and procedure. So first question, why plan? You can pause the video and think about this for a few seconds. So let's share our ideas. Firstly, it provides structure to the lesson. You don't want to be accused of being disorganized by your students. It ensures a logical progression. The logical progression would be generally from reception to production, as the received wisdom is that students have to receive before producing. So that might involve giving them a text, doing some skills work with the text, and then doing a follow-up or having them respond to the text or write something about the text, or look at the language in the text and then use the language from that text. Of course, what I mean by text here could be an anecdote produced by the teacher. The text could be dictated, or it could be a listening or a reading. Balance and variety is important in planning, so that the student doesn't get bored during the class. It's good to keep your students on their toes. Obviously, if you have a plan, you feel more comfortable. You know where you're going and why, and if you know the rationale behind what you're doing in class, that confidence translates to the students. Students like to know where they're going as well. Again, this links to the importance of structure and logical progression. Anticipating problems is a key part of lesson planning. There may be questions the student has about the target language that you may have to research in advance to avoid being caught out on the spot, especially if it's something you haven't taught before and you're not entirely sure of all the rules around that. Anticipating problems with language is obviously one area that you should anticipate problems in, but also materials. For example, is the text too long or too short? Is it too complex? Is it appropriate? Classroom management, are you going to have students working in pairs? Well, if you have 3 students, that is not going to be possible. So what's your solution? Yeah. Lesson planning is also part of assessment on many courses, for example, the Trinity TESOL or the CELTA. So you have to do it if you're going to take one of those courses, and it creates a very good impression on the observer if you are being observed as part of an official observation at the school where you work. Yeah, again, students will notice if you haven't planned and may comment on that. So here's a test for you. Pause the video and try to match the terms on the left with the definitions on the right. Okay, so let's compare our answers. Stage, usually a noun. Examples include control, practice, checking, meaning, lead-in. Main lesson name, usually formulated as the future perfect. However, it doesn't have to be in the future perfect. Instead of saying by the end of the lesson students will have done something, you could just say to practice the present perfect, for example, or to develop students' ability to read for gist. Often it's good to view the lesson from the end, looking back on what students will have achieved by the end of the lesson. So that's the rationale behind that. Stage aim is usually formulated using the infinitive of purpose. So this would answer the question why. So if the stage is controlled practice, the question why would be answered with to provide practice of the target language in a restricted context. Sub-lesson aim could be the main lesson aim if it was focused on more in the lesson. And you may have several sub-lesson aims and one main lesson aim. Again, can be formulated with the future perfect, but it's also formulated using the infinitive of purpose to achieve something. Typically, one of the aims is a skills aim, for example, to listen for gist, and one of the aims is a language aim, for example, to practice the present perfect. But that doesn't have to be the case. It could be purely a skills lesson or purely a language lesson. Procedures formulated using the imperative. The rationale for this is that what is in the procedure often translates into the instructions that you give in the class. So you want your instructions to be concise, and a good way to do that is to write them in the imperative, and then you will use the imperative with your students. So instead of, oh, I'd really like it if you could complete this activity, complete this activity. In the procedure, you would also maybe include the questions you would use to elicit the target language, or the questions you would use to check understanding of a task or the target language. So looking at this, the aim is the why of the lesson or stage, and the procedure would be the how, and the stage would be the when or what. So here's another task. Pause the video and try to think of an example of each of the following. So main lesson aim, usually formulated using this structure, which we'll look at in a minute. Sub-lesson aim, similar structure. Stage, again, we looked at this in the previous slide. Stage aim, again, we'll look at this structure in a second. And the procedure. So I've underlined these grammatical structures. Pause the video and think about what do we call these grammatical structures. So we did this on the previous slide. I gave you some hints. I actually told you what these are. Will have developed. Any guesses? It's the future perfect. It's a point in time in the future, looking back on something that is complete by that point. Again, looking back from the end of the lesson on what will have been done is a very useful way to visualize your lessons. And that goes for the main lesson aim and the sub aim. The stage, again, is a noun or noun phrase. The stage aim is the infinitive purpose, which again answers the question why. And the procedure is in the imperative. So instead of, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand out the picture of my uncle, and then I'm going to ask the students to discuss in pairs. Hand out the picture of my uncle and ask students to discuss in pairs. It's more succinct, and it may translate into more succinct instructions in the classroom. So here's another task for you. Decide whether the following are stages, stage aims, or procedure. So what would the first one be? Pre-teach? Any guesses? I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So now let's compare our answers. Again, what you might notice here about the procedure is that they all use the, what's the name of the structure? Imperative. And the stages use, again, what's the name of the structure? Noun phrases, and the stage aims are all using the, yes, you've guessed it, infinitive of purpose. So here's a task that you can do for homework. This is taken from American English File, so thank you for the authors of that book. Try to plan a lesson using staging, stage aims, procedure, and lesson aims based on these 3 activities. I'll give you a clue. This would be a language lesson rather than a skills lesson. So obviously we don't have time to go through the correct lesson plan on this activity. So you'll have to tell me next time I see you. Just to close, here are some key planning decisions that you can that you should think about when planning your lessons. So if it's a receptive skills lesson, how are you going to generate interest in the listening or the reading? You obviously wouldn't just give them the reading and say, have a look at that. Similarly with the listening, you would prime them for the listening. How would you get them interested? Maybe through a picture, brainstorming, prediction. So basically, don't serve the listening or reading cold. What skills are you going to develop? Now, there are different sub-skills. Listening for gist or reading for gist, listening for detail or reading for detail, scanning or listening for specifics, and prediction. Which of those would you like to develop? And based on your choice of sub-skills, you would choose your activities. And then it's important to think about how you're going to get the students talking or writing. How are you going to get them producing based on what they've read or listened to? So some kind of response to the text, or so that they can use some of the language that they've mined from the text, and to get them thinking about the issues in the text. Now for language lessons, 3 key questions. How are you going to introduce the target language? Now, as I mentioned, you can use a text to do this. You could also do it through a test, through a controlled practice activity. You can do it through some kind of matching or brainstorming or eliciting, various different ways to do it. And then how are you going to clarify the meaning, form, and pronunciation of the target language? How are you going to make it clear to the students what this language means, what the grammatical structures is or are, and how do they pronounce it? Obviously, this depends on the target language. And then, of course, how are you going to get them practicing it? After you've introduced it, after you've clarified it, how are they going to practice it? So here are some ideas. If you like lesson planning, you want to know more about it. Harmer, in his book How to Teach English, has a section on lesson planning. And then Joe Gakonga has some very good YouTube videos you can watch about lesson planning. All right, that's all for this session. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful.